What are the ways that NPCs can end up as racist? We've talked before about how games have had more than a few issues with racial inequality. 85% of the playable characters in games are white, according to the virtual census, and when people of color do appear, they're often relegated to what you call a non-player character.
If God is love, then you can call me Cupid.
Because NPCs lack any agency and generally hold little power, things can get problematic pretty quickly. In a medium where the entire world is subservient to the player's will, games can be racially unequal in ways that other mediums just can't. Movies might have to worry about the power dynamic in narrative, but games have to be concerned with the power imbalance in both narrative and mechanics, particularly when it comes to white player characters facing off against NPCs of color. And that means game designers need to think about everything from the skin color of the enemies on the other end of the barrel to using stereotypes as a crutch for character design. Let's start with enemy design and how people of color are often framed as the villains. Resident Evil 5 takes home the gold of racist creations of NPCs by far, with 95% of the gameplay consisting of a white protagonist killing off hordes of nameless zombie diseased Africans. They actually throw spears. I'm not making this up. Then there are all the war games like Battlefield and Medal of Honor that differentiates the player from enemy targets by using skin color and culture, most recently Arab or Muslim cultures, the same way that the NFL uses different colored jerseys. Even The Legend of Zelda, for all of its childhood innocence, isn't above fault. Ganondorf's Gerudo racial group might be made up, but they're an entire class of people defined by three characteristics: living in the desert, having darker skin, and being thieves. All the heroes are white, of course. Look, I'm not saying that people of color always have to be the good guys, but given the massive inequality in the racial makeup of playable characters, this power dynamic of white guys squaring off against people of color just can't be ignored. Racist NPCs don't just come in the form of enemy hordes, though. Take a listen to Letitia the Trash Lady in Deus Ex Human Revolution.
If it ain't the captain himself.
This isn't Mark Twain, this is just over 3 years ago. Letitia points to an even bigger problem than racially divided enemy hordes. Because as the white protagonist's designated street informant, which is a half step up from using the term urban spy, Letitia exists in the world of Deus Ex solely to grant access to a part of Detroit that's outside of the main character's race and class.
Here, there might be a gun seller or two around town.
She's an example of a person of color who not only suffers from a stereotypical and offensive representation, but also finds themselves in the lesser role of an NPC because they're racially distinct from the white protagonist. But there is hope. Games have gotten a lot better overall. In the 2013 Assassin's Creed DLC Freedom Cry, a black protagonist is the driving force in a story focusing on the slave trade. It's still DLC, but hey, we're getting there. Yet even Freedom Cry inadvertently uses racist mechanics, dehumanizing the slave NPCs by essentially rendering the ones you liberate a nameless resource for experience points. So there's progress, but it's tricky, as all progress is, especially when conventional mechanics often get in the way of a humanizing narrative. But there are still persistent and more indirect issues we need to address, like the shift from offensive stereotypes to tokenism. In movies and television, you'll recognize tokenism as the black best friend problem. A white protagonist has a black friend who show them the ways of the world in quirky ethnic ways. It's an important observation and possibly more relevant to gaming than movies. Even when games do include characters of color, tokenism tends to rear its ugly head. BioShock Infinite, while appealing to the social injustice narrative, ostensibly renders racial inequality a gritty conflict for the gritty white protagonist to solve with quantum physics. And are NPCs always going to be fully fleshed out characters? Of course not, but they also don't need to be written as cheap stereotypes because that's just lazy. Things like Mass Effect and the new Dragon Age include darker skin tones while ignoring them as any indication of race, an odd oversight in the context of their exceedingly racially divided universes. I don't think it's too much to ask to have racially diverse characters whose skin tone is more than just a cosmetic adjustment to make a game appear diverse. It may seem like I'm splitting hairs here, but these types of considerations are exactly the kinds of changes that need to happen for true equality in games. On the 60th anniversary of Brown versus Board of Education, the Supreme Court case that desegregated schools here in the United States, Attorney General Eric Holder delivered an important speech on the changing nature of race and inequality. He acknowledged that we've made progress, but we're moving from the realm of law to culture, from bias to sincere neutrality, from direct racial effects to indirect racial effects, from commission to omission. Essentially, things are changing for the better. We've moved away from not even having characters of color in media to something slightly less racist. But with enemy hordes, stereotypical character design, and tokenism, clearly we still have a long way to go in video games. So what do you think? Do games represent race in NPCs in a problematic way? Hash it out in the comments, and if you like what you saw, please subscribe. I'll see you all next week.
Today's comments are brought to you by Squarespace. Squarespace is an easy way to create a website, blog, or online store for you and your ideas. Squarespace features a user-friendly interface, custom templates, and 24/7 customer support. Try Squarespace at squarespace.com/gameshow for a special offer. Squarespace. Build it beautiful.
Last week, we talked with Joe Hansen of It's Okay to Be Smart about the brain science behind winning. Let's see what you had to say. So in describing the roots of behavioral game design, I pointed to the early days of behaviorism and Skinner boxes and rats pulling levers and thought, that's not really a lot of fun. But apparently I'm wrong because KnaveMurdok points out that you do that all the time in Zelda games. So that's fine, I'll make an amendment. With the exception of games in the Zelda franchise, pulling levers is not very much fun. Oblivious Adobo says that they don't derive a lot of joy from the big payoff of winning at the end of a particular game, but from the process of getting there, which is part of the point. Remember, it's about all these tiny little victories that your brain registers, releases dopamine, and then encourages you to sort of create more opportunities for victories in the future. So even if you don't necessarily get to the end of a game, you still are engaging in that process by working your way through it. So yeah, thanks for the comment. Kiva Bay says that dopamine is part of the process of addiction and is surprised that I didn't discuss things like gambling addiction in the episode. So I actually did a previous one on games as a controlled substance, which I'll link to in the description. And I reiterated a point from that previous episode in this episode just last week, specifically that game designers need to think about their behaviors as being part of an ethical spectrum. So the same way that doctors take a Hippocratic oath, game designers need to think about what they do in terms of like using the tools of neuroscience to keep people sort of on that wheel. They need to think about doing that in a responsible manner. So yeah, great point though. Shirma Akayaku was turned off by all the sort of brain science behind game design and decided not to continue making games. A couple things there. One is that if you're a creator of any different stripe or persuasion, you're always trying to think about ways to sort of keep people interested in the thing that you're creating. It just so happens that the tools that are available to game designers are different and are incredibly effective. However, I would say that you shouldn't let the abuses or the potential abuses of game design be a reason that you don't pursue it. They need more responsible people like you making games. But thanks for the comment. I appreciate it.